What time is it? The time is now. Old things have been done away with. All things are made new. It is the dawning of a new age.
What is it that African people should be aware of and should know?
Well, my name is Takura Mukasa, and I have been telling people about the situation with the Aquarian Age. Basically, what's happened is that we've been in the Piscean Age for the last 2,000 years. And beginning on the 12th of December, we moved into another house, the house of Aquarius. And this is very important and very significant because the house of Aquarius represents, you might say, the exact opposite of the house of Pisces. This is an age that, well, first of all, let's start with the symbol of it. It's a woman with a water pitcher pouring water out onto the earth. And this is symbolic of wisdom being poured onto the planet. This is the age when every man will become a master, the age of self-mastery. It also means abundance. It also means the end of war, the end of violence. And yes, it means the end of what we have come to call Western civilization, to be replaced by the kingdom of God on earth. And so all of the things that are in place today that we now associate with modern life, this is what you could call the diminishing Piscean Age. So that means that everything is about to change. And this is significant for African people because we need to position ourselves in such a way that all of the benefits of the Aquarian Age, which is just beginning, will really begin to flow to us. You've heard me say that the Western civilization is disintegrating.
During the month of December 1994, I had the pleasure of visiting Ghana, West Africa, for PanifFest. It was one of the most moving experiences of my life. When it was over, I was charged to return to America and inform Africans born in America that it was time to leave Babylon and return home to Africa. To be honest with you, this is not a trip I had planned to make. Financially, I could not see how I could pull it off. So when Fanny, a good friend of mine, asked me if I was going to PanifFest, I replied, no. I would like to, but I can't afford it. She said, Minister Brown, you should be there. If it's just the ticket, I will purchase it for you. I really didn't want to be in her debt. So I told her that I would think about it. 2 days later, Professor Smalls asked me to go with he and Professor Leonard Jeffries to PanifFest, and that was a confirmation. However, I still was not sure if I would go. Then Thursday morning, my friend Dr. Anthony Andow called me from California. He said I should definitely be in Africa during the next 9 days because the energy on the planet would change and it would be most concentrated on the African continent. Well, the next day I boarded a plane for Africa. When I finally arrived in Ghana, I went straight to Cape Coast, where PanifFest was already in progress. It was a wonderful sight. All of the kings and queen mothers in the Cape Coast area were there. They had come to celebrate PanifFest. PanifFest is a 7-day government-sponsored festival to celebrate the re-emergence of African civilization. This was just the second time it had happened. Traditionally, African people have been organized around kingship. Notwithstanding that today Ghana is a democratic country with an elected president, the chieftaincy still controls and directs the masses of the people. It is for this reason that the actions of traditional leadership must be taken seriously. For a long time, many voices both on the continent and in the diaspora have called for African people to come together and forgive themselves in ceremonial tradition for their involvement in the slave trade. One of the most profound, moving, and essential events to happen at PanifFest this year was just that. A significant gathering of chiefs came together to perform the ceremonial rites to cleanse and dedicate a stool for the forgiveness of African chiefs in the enslavement of their own people. They asked God and their brothers and sisters all over the world to forgive them. While it must be pointed out that the Africans had no concept of the kind of slavery their people would be subjected to in the West, they nevertheless must shoulder the blame for their participation, no matter at what level they were involved. This event was critical because it is believed by many that Africa's ancestral spirits would not fully work on her behalf because she had not cleansed the blood of her children from her own hands. In Ghanaian society, the stool is the highest symbol of spiritual oneness with the ancestors. And so a stool was created and set aside to represent those ancestors who perished in the slave trade. The most holy man in traditional African society was called to perform prayers and ask God for the forgiveness of Africa for her involvement in the slave trade.
His Holiness Prophet Chief K.O.K. Onyoha, spiritual head, Guardian Religion, Chairman, Organization of Traditional Religions of Africa, and the Ahai of Nkporo.
You attended and was part of a very important ceremony on the Friday. Can you tell us about that ceremony?
Well, it was a ceremony of purification and also contrition on the part of the chiefs of Ghana to ask for God's forgiveness for the role their predecessors played in the transportation of African sons and daughters away to America and other Caribbean islands and overseas to save as slaves. And so we felt very sorry that it ever happened in history, and did that in order to make our own African brothers and sisters in diaspora to realize that what had happened had been a great concern to us, and they should forgive us and come back home, regarding this place as their home, and help in rebuilding Africa.
Brothers and sisters from all over the diaspora and Africa were gathered here. Some of our greatest minds had come. For the next 7 days, we would exchange energy, knowledge. We would plan and organize for the re-emergence of African civilization.
Speak about the crisis in Africa today, crisis here, crisis there, and there are many crises. And we ought to look at it and see whether there are not new initiatives to change those crises. Examine it and find out why. Why are there so many crises in a country which, and among a people who introduced civilization into the world, and now you find them at the bottom of the ladder wherever you go. Countries like Somalia, to take an example. who in the 60s had a progressive development going on its own way, and suddenly something happens and you have a tremendous crisis there. Why are these things happening? Maybe it is that we're using the wrong initiatives. Maybe we ought to look and see what was Africa like before it was penetrated by Western civilization. And I'm not speaking about the birth of civilization. We know it started in Africa, in Egypt, through the Mediterranean, even to Greece, who gave the other people, the Anglo-Saxons, their civilization. I'm not going as far back as there. I'm looking at us before the immediate penetration by the Western powers. Examine who we were and what we were. Study our own history. And then study afterwards and see what happened along the way. How is it that this country, this great peoples who introduced civilization to the world, fell from that position to where we are today, full of crises? Something happened around about the 15th century. I'm not going to repeat this because this is all fact. You don't quarrel with history, you learn from it. But around the 15th century, we were invaded. That's what happened. We were invaded and later raped. And I use these words advisedly. If you consider the developed world, United States, England, Belgium, what have you, Portugal, Japan even, if you consider those countries with all their power bases, their educated people, their computer analysts, their judges, their lawyers, their professors, their business managers, and if you went to any of those developed countries and took away a whole shipload of the best people who made them powerful, and not one shipload, but many shiploads every day, and not every day, every year, and not every year for several centuries, if you did that to any developed country, what would be left? That is what happened to Africa. We were raped.
What was the cultural processing, though, that made that possible? For an example, in Africa, one could be sold into servitude or used in servitude. What is the process? And that's what I want you to explain.
The process, I was not living at that time, and I know too well that the white people came and sold guns, cannons, to our people, to the coastal chiefs, and then incited them with rums and so on to go into the hinterland, make wars, and capture slaves. So the war captives were the people who were sold. And usually nobody born in a community was ever captured and sold into slavery. Only people who were captured during wars, invasions, incited by white people, were the people who were taken away and sold into slavery. So that was the process of the thing. Inspired by the white people, given the guns, armed the coastal people to go into the hinterland, make war on innocent people, and then capture them in the confusion of the war that had been inspired. Capture them and sell them into slavery. That was the process.
Traders, would you explain?
Yeah, they were the greatest slave traders.
Who were the greatest?
The Aros, people of Arochukwu in Igbo land. They were the greatest traders. But by the trickery of
We
the
took
Aro
every opportunity to meet one another and to exchange ideas and research.
into slavery. I even knew a friend of mine, Professor Ume.
Professor Jeffries?
Yeah.
You know Professor Jeffries?
No, I am. We talk about reemergence of African civilization. I was wondering when people were talking history about civilization of the Egyptians and so on, I was wanting to ask a question. What was the quintessence of that civilization? What was the pervading principle of that civilization? Was it civilization of invasion and conquest and empire? And if it is that, is it what we are going to reenact in the present and then start? So that is the thing. Well, but I know that the civilization Africans maintained was civilization of peace. That is exactly what was the pervading principle of
We go
our
a little
civilization.
further and say that it was the principle of transformation. into godliness.
Yeah.
So the peace became more than just peace, it became an obligation,
Yeah.
a responsibility to act like God, to
Yeah.
live like God, to understand God principles.
Yeah.
So the Nile becomes important, not just Egypt. Egypt is really the culmination of a deeper tradition from the southern part, more south of the Nile itself, where the central principle was this spirituality of being able to transform into godliness and understanding the laws of the universe.
Yeah.
Well, that's why they were able to sustain it. When you understand it, for 5,000 years you could sustain
Yeah,
a
that's
civilization. That's an extraordinary thing. You had to have a culture
Of peace.
of peace, but a culture that held things together,
Yeah.
and right, more than just conquests.
Yeah.
You had to have a culture that sustained things through a spiritual relationship.
Why did you ask that question?
Well, you see, I asked that question because this is exactly the concern of the Godian religion, to return people to God, a culture of peace based on God himself, because God is love. So that the pervading principle, the quintessence of the civilization of the black man which is going to come, and of which Godian religion is flag bearer, is one of peace and love among men. Because that is the real definition of civilization itself. But unfortunately, the white man seems to hold the stick of civilization upside down and at the wrong end, with emphasis on technological know-how.
And conquest,
And
domination.
conquest, yes. Mass production of nuclear weapons for mass destruction of God's own creations, to the utter neglect of the human mind. Well, that's why they take culture for civilization itself. Because the principle, the essence of civilization is living together. And man became civilized only when he started living together. And it is this living together, gregariousness, that made man the superior he is to lower animals. And the moment that gregariousness is dashed, man has become subhuman, the equal of lower animals, uncivilized. In fact, that sort of understanding of civilization that the Godian religion wants to peddle around the world. Because when you talk of God, God himself is symbolic of love. And love leads to peace. So that's exactly what you are talking about when you talk about the higher level of Egyptian civilization that led to godliness.
Right. And one of the, I'm noticing the feathers in your crown, one of the important symbols of the Nile became the feather of truth. Because you were seeking a peaceful society, a loving society, but a society that was just, a just society. And so the Ma'at, the concept of Ma'at, M-A-A-T, with the symbol being the women holding the feather of truth, and the balance and the harmony and reciprocity that that value system symbolizes becomes
Which
important.
was at the epicenter of the culture.
Yeah, that's
The concept of Ma'at was at the epicenter of the culture. It was a regulating principle that held the whole of ancient Egypt together.
His Holiness, can I ask you, do you see a connection between traditional religion, because the Godian religion is a composite of traditional religion? Do you see a connection between traditional religion and ancient Egyptian or Kemetan religion?
Of course, Egypt was, the Kemetians were Africans. And Africans had the same uniform behavior and attitude to God and religion. So that there is no difference at all. There is this connection. It's just, for instance, we say that the Godian religion represents organization of traditional religions of Africa. Just in the same way that Hinduism was a hodgepodge of the native religions of India, based on river Hindus, which they regarded as the cradle of their civilization. So too, Godian religion is a collection and a symbolic representation of the totality of the various expressions of Africa's traditional religion. So there is connection. And not only that, you see, we are doing quite a study. It is true people refer to Egypt always as the source fountain of black civilization. But in the University of Nigeria, and I see too, that only very few Egyptologists and anthropologists had projected the age of Egypt beyond 4,000 years. And then you see in eastern Nigeria, the University of Nigeria had been able to discover a civilization that was able to produce high-quality pottery art that dated back to 5,000 years BC. And another thing, according to a book which was written by R.G. Armstrong, The Languages of West Africa, he said that the whole of West Africa, ranging from the Guinea coast and from Liberia down to the Cross River, and shooting into the hinterland up to 325 kilometers. Draw your line back to Liberia. All the people before were speaking one common language, mother tongue, and they called it the Kwa language. Then the Igbos delimited from that language by glottochronology by 7,000 BC. So you see, this is, and the Yorubas delimited from it by 6,000 BC, and the Beninese from it by 5,000 BC. Which means that here in West Africa, there had been a civilization much older than Egyptian civilization. And I think so much is written about Egypt because the people who were writing were Europeans closer to them. And not much justice has been done to the history of West Africa itself. And that's exactly...
I think the major factor for us is that what is remaining of Nile Valley civilization, not only Egypt itself, but Nubia and in what we call Ethiopia, there's so much that remains, whereas in West Africa, there's so much that we've got to discover.
Yeah,
so that
is true.
becomes important.
And not only that, centuries of history, I saw a map drawn by the early Portuguese people, dating back to 1626. That was copied by a white man. But that map had the body of water watering the west coast of Africa, from the Tropic of Cancer down to the Tropic of Capricorn and to the mango tip of West Africa, designated as the Ethiopian Ocean. But then they came to call it Atlantic Ocean only from a map dated 1656. So it would seem that at the time that they started enslaving us, they thought that we were no longer qualified in human dignity to take the credit of the body of water passing through our territory named after us. So that now set me thinking, if the Portuguese came and called the body of water watering the west coast of Africa from the Tropic of Cancer down to the Tropic of Capricorn and to the mango tip of South Africa, calling it Ethiopian Ocean, then does it mean then Ethiopia, as we know it today, is restricted to Ethiopia as it is now in the Bible? I mean, in geography, or did it start from West Africa? That's one of those things that our scholars have got to investigate. And of course, you know that West African mariners had been going to America, South America, 2,000 years even before a person like Columbus thought of setting sail for America in 1492. But we have been going there, and that time was about 600 BC. The West African mariners had been there.
Can I just ask a question, because we have a number of our eminent thinkers here, and it's very rare that we have such minds together at the same time from a number of continents. Can I ask all of you, first of all, why did you think it was important to come to PanifFest? And secondly, what is the crucial cultural question that's facing us right now as African people? May I start with you? Can you give me your name, please?
I'm on Saba Sakana, based in London. I was given an invitation here, first of all, taking place, which was meant to bring together the minds of the best of the African world, wherever they might be. What we need to do is, based upon scientific research, thorough investigation of our history, which we are coming very closely to agreeing on that. From that, we have to agree on a commonality of an approach. This PanifFest draws minds from across the ocean in different ways, from the Caribbean, from the Americas, from Europe, and from Africa. What we are doing here is comparing notes with the extent of the investigations and the researches that we have done. Once we have done that, thoroughly and satisfactorily, then we can go back and create the mechanism to launch the results of these researches into a kind of programmatic organizational structure, which would then take off.
An approach to what?
An approach to how do we deal with our history and our culture and our civilization, and how do we create a renaissance based upon those objective researches that we have done.
Has that renaissance already happening? Are we in the midst of that renaissance?
I think it is already beginning. By the kind of research that's taking place all over the world, and lots of people who were not involved in dialogue before are coming into it. People who took very odd positions, they had to moderate the positions because of the existence of this kind of dialogue and research. That, to me, already tells us very, in a startling kind of way, that there is a body of thought and a movement taking place in the African world, which inevitably will lead to a rebirth of our civilization, incorporating the best of our past and the best of what we are today.
Really briefly, what was your paper about? The paper you presented?
My paper is a comparison between the Greek world between 850 and 330 BC and the Egyptian world or Kemetan world in terms of the comparative situation socioeconomically, sociopolitically for the emergence of philosophy in either society. And I suggest that because Greek society was constitutionally a slave society, that the world of the gods was a world of violence, of death, of disease. The appearance of woman even in the godly world was one of disease, death, and conflict. In all these ways, in all these forms, Greek society could not have produced anything resembling philosophy simply because socioeconomically, sociopolitically, constitutionally, legally, the society was completely inimical, completely antagonistic to any semblance of a philosophy that talked about egalitarianism, that talked about morality, fundamental rearmament. Every single philosopher who called himself a philosopher in Greece had to migrate out of Greece, either killed, drank poison, sentenced to death. He was totally, absolutely against the traditions of the society. And so philosophy had never emerged in Greece and never had emerged in any Western nation today. No Western nation uses philosophy as we had used it in ancient times and traditional times in the regulation of society.
And why is it important for us to discuss that?
It is important for us to discuss it because we have claims by the Western world that these things are emanated from them. And they have not. They do not have the social organization that supports that kind of practice of morality. They don't have it. It doesn't exist.
2 years ago in Ghana, when the National Council for Black Studies, one of the organizations we founded in the 70s in the United States to coordinate the Black Studies, the programs, 300 or 400 Black Studies programs in our country. The theme that I presented my paper around was operational Pan-Africanism, how to make it functional for our people. And culture becomes key. I use a tripartite relationship to begin to understand why we need to have and how we can put together a system capability using the pyramidal, using the triangular shape of the pyramid. At one polarity, we have what I call the thesis. The other polarity, you have the antithesis and then the synthesis. Well, the thesis for any systems capability we're talking about is economics. And African peoples, as we make operational what we're doing, we've got to have an economic foundation. We've got to control the mother continent and its wealth. We've got to control the productivity of Africans outside of the mother continent and be able to establish a systems relationship. But you cannot do that if you don't have politics. Politics is not what a king or a queen mother does or a president of a government. Politics is what you do, what people do, what groups and communities do to manage their economics, first and foremost. So you need a management capability to go along with your productive capability. So economics and politics become the twin foundation upon which to build a system. But they don't want us to have this. The system that has been reared against us does not want us to have this understanding. They want to control our economics. They want us to be productive, but they want to control it. They will colonize and have, and now are recolonizing our politics. But the key to keeping your economics and your politics together is culture. If you do not have culture, that's the synthesis. That's the summit. That is the cement that holds it together. Economics represents your ecology. Your ecology will determine your economics. Politics is representative of your sociology, how you put the living systems together to make your management capability work. And culture is the mind. Culture is the psychology. And it's this important African psychological rebirth that we're going through that is going to lead us into the 21st century very meaningfully. The European, when he came on the scene 500 years ago in disarray, was able to put his economics, politics, and culture together in unbelievable dimensions by accidents of history, discovering the wealth of West Africa, discovering so-called New Worlds, and having a conflict internally between Christianity that produced what was called the Protestant Reformation, which unleashed this concept of individualism, this concept of an elective God, and that became the raison d'etre and the motivation for putting economics and politics together in a negative fashion for the European. The central point of that being the enslavement process, the so-called slave trade system. So the European over the next 500 years was able to weave together this system based upon his economic interests, his political interests, his cultural interests, and that cultural center of his value system was white supremacy. So we're caught up in a system of white supremacy that has dominated the world, and we are now re-emerging with an understanding of African primacy. We're not talking about superiority, inferiority, but we're talking about African primacy. There's a primacy of Africanness that motivates the human existence. Africa is the origin of the human family. There's only one human race, and that race is African. There's an African evolution of society. As humankind evolves into large-brained human, Homo sapiens sapien, you're talking about an African phenomenon. So old African is in this continent. New African is in this continent. And then when we're talking about modern humanity, we're talking about Africa, the cradle of civilization in the river valleys. So the European does not have a role to play in this development. Because he does not, he's falsified history, he's colonized it, he's stolen our legacy, and implanted in us a feeling of inadequacy and inferiority vis-a-vis his domination. But that's changing. Science and history is on our side. This explosion of information is now being interpreted in meaningful ways. So we've got to make it operational in our lives, in our communities. And I think we're about that.
What is unique, though, about the time that we're living in now, about this event? What stage are we at? How would you describe it?
Well, Ghana is at a historical crossroads. Ghana, very significantly, was a major location for the enslavement process. There are 40 slave forts and dungeons along the Ghana coast alone. Not talking about Dahomey in Nigeria or Angola, not talking about Ivory Coast or Guinea, Sierra Leone, or Gambia or Dakar. In Ghana, there was this enormous concentration, and the European system imposed itself here. First the Portuguese, and then later other European groups. And you had the Dutch, the Danes, and the Swedes, and the Brandenburg Germans, the Colanders, and the English, of course, and the French involved. And it's this imposition of Europe on Africa that led to this bleeding of the continent. We've never resolved this. We've asked for, Professor Small, myself, and others have asked for a traditional healing process to be put in place. And over the last few years, we've seen it happen. At one particular meaningful ceremony 2 years ago at Elmina Dungeon, we don't call it castle, Elmina Dungeon, the traditional leaders had a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice on the dungeon itself. And then they had an installment of myself in the courtyard of the dungeon as a member of the Asafo Company. This was the type of bonding that we had asked for. The ancestry can begin to pull us together. Unless we heal this enormous breach that enslavement represents, we won't be able to have the type of operational Pan-African unity that we need. So this is an important part of it. Ghana has proved that you can resurrect. Kwame Nkrumah had a vision of an African unified in the tradition of Marcus Garvey and pulled together many of our people to do that. But then with the CIA coups and other internal dimensions, he lost his position. And for decades, he was dragged in the African mud. But some light was brought here to Ghana to resurrect him. And the resurrection is an enormity. The Nkrumah Memorial Park in Accra is the likes of which you have not seen anywhere in the world. It is fitting for the pharaohs, the leaders, the queens of the Nile themselves. So I'm saying there's a renaissance taking place. If you want examples of it, you can see it all around you. We hope in a year to bring 1,000 people to Ghana for the type of communion that we had in the Nile Valley with 1,000 people in 1987. We formed a national organization inspired by Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark and our leaders in America, picking up the work of Dr. Diop, and that association is the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations. And when you realize that in 1987, the organization was the idea was conceived in 84, the organization became operational in 85. We had the major conference in New York under our auspices in 86. By 87, we dreamed of and actually planned and went to the Nile with 1,000 people for a conference. That's the Renaissance we're talking about. 1,000 people going back to all of the corners of America, and some of them to the UK, have been taking the lead in bringing this light to our people in enormous ways. So there is a renaissance of enormous proportion. Dr. Diep saw that when he came to America, and he saw the enthusiasm among some of our scholars and concerned community leaders, more enthusiastic than those on the African continent itself.
Let me just ask you in regard to that. Thinkers, activists in the diaspora have something to bring to this table. Thinkers, scholars, activists in Africa have something to bring to the table. What's the kind of uniqueness, what's the perspective that both sides of the family bring to the table?
Well, I think you hit the point on the head when you said the family. It is operating as a family, an African family, which will be the key to what we're all about. Enslavement was an enormous tearing up of the African spirit and the African family. As we approach the Europeans, we deal with it in terms of reparations. There's no question about it. What is owed the Africans can never be repaid. But as we deal with each other as family, we can have a special relationship in terms of restoring the legitimate rights of Africans pulled out of Africa to the African continent. So the Africans out of Africa can be major contributors to the Renaissance in Africa once our legitimate rights are recognized. Not by Africans who have developed a nationalist approach around their little entities, most of which have been put in place by the Europeans, but Africans who understand our common family relationship. Other people with insignificant capabilities have been able to achieve enormous things. The Jewish population has a world population of 15 to 16 million. We have a world population of more than 1 billion. The Jewish population does not have a major landmass, the richest landmass in the world, but they have bits and pieces of a place called Palestine. And they're able to put together a system capability of influencing, dominating an important part of the world's resources. Other people are emerging, like the Japanese, who were defeated in 1945, who've come out of the ashes, who don't have a land mass, who don't have the population that we have, but who are able to put together the type of family unity that has produced an economic, political, and cultural dynamic to give them the capability of playing a major role in the 21st century. If we were going to have a 21st century, as Dr. Asa Halyard says, we only have one option: to be African or not to be. And see, that becomes the key to understanding the philosophical approach that our people are now raising. One of our scholars, Marimba Ani, who is called Donna Riches, Professor Donna Riches, she's written a book called Urugu. And one of the concepts that she's developed, and that's why we're in this very powerful mode, because Dr. Wade Noble says power is the ability to define reality and have other people respond to your definition as if it were their own. And Professor Ani has developed the concept of Mafa, M-A-F-A, that it wasn't just an enslavement process that the Europeans finally put together for Africans. It was the wrenching of Africans out of the human family, which is an enormity when you realize that we are the human family. And that tearing of the Africans out of the human family and all of the implications of that are still with us. So our reemergence involves a healing process of enormous proportions, but we can do it. We have the enormous world population. We're strategically placed everywhere in the world. We have a mother continent that's the centerpiece of this process. We have a philosophical tradition. We have a spiritual tradition, and that becomes the key. If we tap into the spiritual tradition that has allowed us to survive, that's an empowerment process. And that's not a Christian process. There's not a Muslim process. There's not a Judean process. That's an African spiritual process. And that's what I hope that we will be dwelling on meaningfully as we began to weave things together, the African spiritual process.
Everything is about to change. And this is significant for African people because we need to position ourselves in such a way that all of the benefits of the Aquarian age, which is just beginning, will really begin to flow to us. You've heard me say that the Western civilization is disintegrating. That means that it's not wise for us to be living within the system and the social order itself, because as it disintegrates, it will not be able to provide the services that we have previously come to expect. And so that means no jobs, no unemployment, the things we've already seen, the homelessness, This is evidence of this disintegrating order. So the wise thing for us to do, in my opinion, is that we need to get back to the land in a self-sufficient manner and begin to actually do what we have not done up till now, which is to completely take care of ourselves. Total self-sufficiency, and I mean right down to eating utensils. We need to start to make everything ourselves, farming, fishing, making clothes, sandals, and all the things we wear, and we do it all completely ourselves. And I could say that it would be difficult for us to achieve that full self-sufficiency in America because of the, let's say, the social climate and just the setup that's there today. But a place where that would be much more, that's more open to that kind of social order would be the continent of Africa. So if there was ever a time that we would want to make a transition into Africa and begin to make our presence felt there, this would be the time.
Important for us to do this now because of what?
It's important that we make a transition into Africa because the fact is that everything is all set up for us to relocate there. The people are making lands available, and there's not really no obstacle to us coming and settling on the land. But I think we should follow the Garvey ideal, which was that we all be together and we all be in community as opposed to being here as individuals as we are now. By us being together, we first of all secure the individual members of the group because we're all working in each other's interests. At the same time, we become a kind of a brain trust for the African peoples. Right now, they are very much hungry for all sorts of information and all sorts of wisdom about how to position themselves in their society. This has to do with the fact that the white people that control Africa today, or let's say are educating Africans today, are giving them a lot of false information about how things need to be done. And so one thing we can do that would be very helpful is to bring all of our knowledge and expertise to Africa and put it at the disposal of the Africans. And we do it in a collective manner. And perhaps the best way to do that would be is we were embodied as a university or an institute of learning. Then we can educate each other to the things we know, because right now we need to be aware of the other disciplines that brothers and sisters have in the States. At the same time, we need to study with our African brothers about the African tradition and the things we're weak in, and at the same time educate them to the modern technology and ideas related to modern organization. Because if you put all of us together, the Africans and the African Americans, there's very little that would be missing from that study. That would be a complete study, and it would be, it would take all the things into consideration that need to be said and done. And so this would be a time for empowerment. Empowerment for all the people. So it's a spiritual thing. It's not like a good idea that we should work on and wouldn't it help us. This is actually something that the Creator, I could almost say, is recommending. This is the spiritual time that we're in, all in relation to the unfolding Aquarian age. Control, we now are in the position we're in today, and we know who He is and what we have to do. We have to recognize that He's coming out of His powers, and He's soon to get a judgment because of the fact that He is now about to lose His inheritance. He's about to lose everything. And so this is not a time where you want to be aligning yourself with Him. This is not to say that He's, you know, it's not like saying He's going to hell or whatever. There's a place for people that think the way He does. There's a dimension that we've heard of that's been prepared for Him so He can continue to live in that lifestyle, because under the law of free will, He has the right, they have the right to live in a satanic philosophy. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we protect ourselves, and that would be by, as I say, disassociating ourselves from him and getting into a proper environment where we can grow and develop within the plan of God.
To do us any harm?
Oh, well, he can't do us any harm because of the fact that, first of all, in relation to the Aquarian Age, powerful rays are being focused on the planet now. This planet has a powerful violet ray that's inundating the entire planet. This is a ray that is a peace energy. And so this is why they call this time in the Bible the 1,000 years of peace. Peace is the order of the day. Peace and love is the order of the Aquarian Age. If you're holding peace and love, you're in harmony with the times. And those that are not holding peace and love, those that are holding prejudice, racism, hatred, they are becoming out of alignment with the planet's energy. And so what's going to happen is they're facing heart attack, mental illness. You're going to see more evidence of it. Important white people, I can even think of one right now. Woody Allen has gone crazy. Other VIPs in the white community are cracking up because they are held tightly to the negative attitudes and beliefs. And so we're going to see more of this. So he has no power over us. So this is a time where you have nothing to fear, and it's okay to just step right forward and do what you have to do, and all he can do is watch you go by. He's hoping that you will not take advantage of the opportunity to advance yourself, and that you'll stay with him and die with him or go down with him. But this would be a good time to show him that, yes, you do have the authority to move forward. You're aware of the times we're in, and we'll take the necessary steps to ensure that we have the bright future that the Creator has prepared for us. Because the Aquarian Age represents the total abundance. You could think of it as the greatest gift that the Creator could possibly give to you. Because I think I forgot to mention, we're moving from the third dimension into the fifth dimension. The third dimension is a level of extreme density. It's considered to be almost a subhuman level. We're living below the level of most humanoids in the universe. But we're moving into the fifth level, through the fourth and on to the fifth level, which is the etheric level. And this is a level of utopia, where everything you want is easy to manifest. It's a time of, in fact, that is one of the main points of the etheric level, is that you can manifest anything you want without working a job, without striving after money. You spend your time in service to God, and there's nothing at all for you to struggle for. But in order for you, as I think I mentioned earlier, to attain that, you have to be open to the Creator, recognize the Creator. You have to hold the attitude of peace and love very strongly, and all of the other things that you need will be flowing to you. A good thing that you want to do in relation to this is meditate. Try meditating on a daily basis. If you don't know how to meditate, check in with some of the brothers and sisters that know how. Meditation is important because when you meditate, you align yourself with the inner Christ. Everyone has a God within them, and this inner Christ is directly tied to the Creator, in the Supreme Creator. So what you're doing is you're plugging into your inner guidance and wisdom, and then you'll know exactly what role you need to play in this unfolding situation. So meditation every day is recommended, and also deep breathing. When you bring in the prana, you're bringing in the wisdom factor. And you'll find that if you breathe and meditate as much as possible, probably an hour a day would be good, you'll find that you'll see a lot of growth and development in yourself and your friends very rapidly. because the planet's energies are very much supporting your spiritual development anyway. But by you not meditating, you're blocking out the energies that are coming in.
What about eating and our living habits?
Well, since we're moving into this higher age, eating is an issue because you want to be concerned about your vehicle. As you go into the etheric level, you're going beyond death. We're going into immortality, where we were formerly at. We're actually returning to our former estate that we held in ancient times. And you want to protect the vehicle because you're taking your body with you. There is no more death. Death is, that doesn't mean people won't die at this moment. Some people will die, but primarily the people that are alive today will be living continuously right on into the next period. So you protect your vehicle by a good vegetarian diet. Fruitarian diet would be highly recommended. And if you're concerned about not having any meat in the diet, I recommend fish and chicken, and stay away from beef and pork at all costs, because that is very damaging to the body. And this way, your diet will propel you forward without any problem. And sisters, that you need to prepare now for Africa. I know this isn't the teaching of the leadership in America. In fact, most of them have talked against that. But I'm telling you, as a spiritual teacher, that everything in our history was in preparation for us going back into Africa. We went into America because we had fallen away from our higher estate, and we needed to gather some substance. And this is why we had the integration movement, let's say the movement of Dr. Martin Luther King. He brought us out of segregation into a time when we could get that substance. So now we have a lot of technical brothers around, a lot of well-informed, highly educated people. There's a reason for us having achieved more education than any black people in the world, because our job was to take that knowledge home and integrate with our brothers so that all of us together could move into the highest levels of spiritual and mental development. And I would recommend that you begin that process by setting up an institute to educate yourselves to all areas of self-sufficiency, primarily agriculture, which we know little about, alternative energy sources, solar energy, and all of the things that we know about that are related to what you would imagine you would need to live in a self-sufficient manner on the African continent. You begin to work with your brothers and sisters to share that information, and then you'll be prepared to go to the next level, which will be told to you at the proper time. But I can tell you the Creator has a plan to take you home, and don't concern yourself with where's the transportation. He's even taking care of that. Yes. You'll be hearing more about that later.
Thank you.